It was a busy evening at La Belle Maison, a restaurant known for its exclusivity and refined elegance. The tables buzzed with laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. For the patrons who filled its velvet-lined seats, this was a sanctuary of sophistication. At the hostess stand, Samantha stood poised, her polished smile welcoming to some and coldly dismissive to others. She had a practiced eye for sizing people up in a heartbeat, making silent judgments with a certainty she rarely questioned. The doors opened, and a faint chill accompanied an elderly woman's entrance. Mrs. Iris Williams walked in, her movements steady but unhurried, her presence commanding in its simplicity. Her dress was modest, her coat practical, but there was an undeniable grace about her that seemed to command attention, if one cared to notice. Samantha noticed, but not in the way that mattered. Her smile faltered, then quickly sharpened into a polite facade. "Good evening," Iris said, her voice calm and measured, a subtle warmth beneath her words. "Reservation?" Samantha asked without meeting her eyes, already assuming the answer. The moment hung briefly, unnoticed by most, but heavy enough to draw a glance from Maria, a young server nearby who had worked under Samantha long enough to sense trouble brewing. For Samantha, this woman didn't belong. Not here. Not tonight. And with one dismissive exchange, she was ready to make sure Iris knew it too. But as the night unfolded, Samantha would come to learn that assumptions could be dangerous. And this guest wasn't just another stranger passing through. As we delve into this story, if you believe everyone should be treated with respect, not because of their status, but because they are human, subscribe now. In the heart of the evening's rush, the air at La Belle Maison buzzed with conversation and quiet elegance. Every table seemed to glow under the soft amber light, and the clinking of wine glasses punctuated the hum of muted laughter. At the front, Samantha stood confidently at her station, the gatekeeper of this high-end domain. Iris Williams approached the stand with measured steps. She paused, waiting patiently for Samantha to acknowledge her. But Samantha, fully engrossed in her conversation with another guest, took her time. When she finally turned to face Iris, her smile was tight, her tone thinly veiled with indifference. "Good evening. How can I help you?" Samantha asked, her eyes scanning Iris briefly, already forming her conclusion. Iris, calm and self-assured, replied, "I'd like a table for one, please." Without so much as a glance at the reservation system, Samantha's response was curt. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked this evening." Her words were polite on the surface, but her tone carried an edge that made it clear she wasn't going to look further. Iris tilted her head slightly, her expression unbothered. "I see. Perhaps you could double-check? I'm happy to wait if necessary." Samantha let out a faint sigh, rolling her eyes just enough to make her disdain noticeable. "I'll save you the trouble," she replied. "There's no way we can accommodate you." It was a dismissal, plain and simple. Samantha didn't bother hiding the implication that Iris didn't belong there. In her mind, Iris's modest attire and calm demeanor didn't align with the usual patrons of La Belle Maison. But Iris didn't flinch. She stood there for a moment, her composure unshaken, her dignity intact. With a gracious smile, she simply said, "Thank you," before stepping aside. As she pulled out her phone and made a quiet call, Samantha smirked, assuming that Iris was leaving. The young hostess turned her attention back to the waiting diners, her judgment unchecked and her confidence unshaken. Little did she know, this encounter would be one she wouldn't soon forget. What would you have done if you were in Iris's shoes? Would you have walked away or stood your ground? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. The minutes ticked by as Iris remained seated nearby, waiting patiently. Samantha's confidence grew, certain she had handled the situation appropriately. But Maria, a nearby server, had seen the entire exchange. She glanced at Samantha with unease, her gut telling her that this wasn't over. Samantha, however, paid no attention. To her, Iris was already forgotten, a fleeting interaction with no lasting significance. But for Iris Williams, this moment was merely the opening move in a much larger story. Maria, a young and observant server, had been stationed nearby during the interaction between Samantha and Iris Williams. While she couldn't hear every word, she saw enough to piece together the tone and intent of Samantha's behavior. Maria's stomach churned as she watched Samantha's dismissive demeanor. She had worked under Samantha long enough to recognize when the hostess had made one of her infamous snap judgments. But Maria hesitated. Samantha was confident, commanding, and had a way of brushing off anyone who dared to question her. Speaking up might cause trouble, and Maria didn't want to jeopardize her position. Still, she couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. Unable to stay silent, Maria approached the restaurant manager, Mr. Harris. Quietly, she recounted what she had seen, her voice low and cautious. "I don't think Samantha handled that guest fairly," Maria admitted, glancing back toward the hostess stand. "She didn't even check the system before saying we were fully booked." Mr. Harris, a composed but firm leader, frowned slightly as he listened. "I'll look into it," he said, his tone neutral but carrying a note of concern. Meanwhile, Iris Williams had taken a seat in the restaurant's plush waiting area, her posture calm and unbothered. She pulled a book from her bag and began to read, as if she had all the time in the world. This simple act of patience unsettled Samantha, who cast irritated glances toward her from the hostess stand. "She's still here?" Samantha muttered under her breath, to no one in particular. Her annoyance was evident, and her words carried just enough volume to be overheard by nearby patrons. Some people just don't take the hint. A few diners exchanged curious and uneasy glances. The atmosphere around the waiting area began to shift subtly as whispers circulated. Iris, however, remained undeterred, turning the pages of her book with serene composure. Then the doors to the restaurant opened, and in walked a tall, sharply dressed man with a presence that commanded the room. Mr. Johnson, one of the restaurant's most well-regarded patrons, was greeted warmly by several staff members as he made his way toward the waiting area. When Mr. Johnson spotted Iris, his face broke into a wide smile. "Iris, what a surprise to see you here," he exclaimed, extending his hand. Iris stood to greet him, their handshake followed by a warm hug. Their exchange was effortless, filled with the kind of familiarity that spoke of a long and meaningful acquaintance. The surrounding patrons took notice, their quiet observations fueling a growing curiosity. From the hostess stand, Samantha froze, her confident demeanor faltering for the first time. She recognized Mr. Johnson immediately. His reputation as an influential figure in the city was well known, but her confusion was evident as she struggled to reconcile the modestly dressed woman she had dismissed with someone who could share such an easy rapport with him. "I didn't know you dined here," Iris said with a smile, her tone warm yet effortlessly poised. Mr. Johnson chuckled. "Occasionally, but what brings you here? Are you waiting for someone?" Before Iris could reply, Samantha approached hesitantly, her usual air of superiority replaced by uncertainty. "Good evening, Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice unusually soft. "I wasn't aware you knew, Mrs. Williams." Mr. Johnson turned toward Samantha, his expression one of mild surprise. "Know her?" "Iris is an old friend," he said, matter of fact. "One of the sharpest and most accomplished people I've had the pleasure of working with." Samantha's face flushed as the weight of her assumptions began to sink in. Have you ever seen someone judge another person too quickly, only to be proven wrong? Share your stories in the comments below, and if you believe that prejudice should be checked immediately, hit the subscribe button now and like the video. Only those who do not stand against prejudice would not subscribe now. As Samantha stood awkwardly by, struggling to find the right words, Iris simply smiled. She didn't need to say much. The unfolding events spoke volumes. And while Samantha's assumptions were beginning to unravel, this was only the beginning of the lesson she was about to learn. Maria, watching from a distance, felt a quiet sense of vindication. Mr. Harris, too, seemed to register the gravity of the situation, his gaze shifting between Samantha and Iris. The whispers among the diners grew louder, the tension building as everyone waited to see what would happen next. But for Iris, there was no rush. She had all the time in the world. Word of Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Williams's unexpected acquaintance had already reached Mr. Harris. The manager had been keeping a watchful eye ever since Maria quietly raised her concerns. Now, seeing Iris seated calmly in the waiting area, completely at ease despite Samantha's dismissive treatment, Mr. Harris knew he had to step in. He approached Iris with a warm but apologetic smile. "Good evening, ma'am. My name is Robert Harris. I'm the manager here. I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced tonight." Iris looked up from her book, her serene expression unchanging. "Thank you, Mr. Harris," she said gently. "No need to apologize. I'm happy to wait here." Her grace and politeness only heightened Mr. Harris's discomfort. He nodded respectfully. "If there's anything I can do to make you more comfortable while you wait, please don't hesitate to let me know." As Mr. Harris walked away, Samantha watched from her post at the hostess stand, her composure slowly unraveling. She had never seen her manager approach a guest so attentively before. Whispers began to circulate among the staff. Maria had shared the incident with a few co-workers, and they were now watching the scene unfold with growing interest. "Who is she?" someone murmured in the kitchen. "She must be someone important," another replied. Samantha's confidence faltered further as these whispers reached her ears. Her mind raced, replaying the interaction with Iris. Had she made a mistake? But even as doubt crept in, she clung to the belief that this was all just a misunderstanding. That belief was shattered 5 minutes later. The restaurant doors opened, and in walked a man whose presence demanded attention. Mr. Blake, the owner of La Belle Maison, exuded authority and charisma. He was a legend in the industry, known for turning restaurants into iconic establishments. Mr. Blake scanned the room, his gaze falling on Iris almost instantly. A broad smile lit up his face, and he strode toward her with open arms. "Iris!" he exclaimed warmly, his voice carrying through the dining room. "It's been too long." Iris stood, returning his embrace with the same calm grace she had shown all evening. "Good to see you, Blake," she replied, her tone familiar and friendly. The staff froze, and the buzz of conversation among the patrons quieted. Samantha, standing rigid at her post, felt her stomach drop. Mr. Blake turned to face the staff and addressed them with pride. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Iris Williams. She's not just a valued guest, she's the largest investor in this restaurant. We wouldn't be here without her vision and support." The words hit Samantha like Mike Tyson's knockout punch. The woman she had dismissed so casually was, in fact, the foundation of everything La Belle Maison represented. The realization left her breathless. Samantha's face turned pale as she slowly approached the group. Her voice, once so confident, now wavered with uncertainty. "Mrs. Williams, I had no idea. I'm so sorry if I was less than welcoming earlier." Iris looked at her, her expression calm but unreadable. "Thank you for your apology," she said simply, her tone neither harsh nor forgiving. It was the kind of response that carried weight without raising its voice. Samantha stammered, searching for more words to salvage her pride, but none came. The silence around her was deafening. What would you do if you were in Samantha's position now? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for more powerful tales like this one. As Samantha stood frozen, Mr. Blake turned back to Iris. "Shall we?" he asked, gesturing toward the private dining room reserved for special guests. Iris nodded, casting one last glance at Samantha. Her look wasn't one of anger or triumph. It was one of quiet reflection, as if to say, "Let this be a lesson you don't forget." The staff and patrons watched in silence as Iris and Mr. Blake disappeared into the private room. Samantha was left standing at the hostess stand, the weight of her actions pressing down on her like never before. After an extended conversation in the private dining room, Iris Williams and Mr. Blake emerged, their expressions light yet purposeful. Iris's calm demeanor hadn't wavered all evening, and as she walked back into the main dining area, her gaze found Samantha. Samantha stood stiffly at her post, her usual confidence replaced by a visible unease. She had spent the past moments replaying her actions over and over in her mind. When Iris approached, she straightened instinctively, unsure of what to expect. Iris stopped a few steps away, her presence commanding the attention of everyone nearby. The hum of the restaurant seemed to fade, and in a voice as steady as it was impactful, she spoke. "You know," Iris began, "when I walked in here tonight, I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary. Just a meal, some time to myself, and maybe a little kindness." She paused, her words hanging in the air. "But instead I was met with judgment. You decided who I was before I could even say my name." Samantha's eyes darted to the floor, shame written across her face. Iris continued, her tone firm but never harsh. "You never know who you're speaking to. And more importantly, that shouldn't matter. Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect, not because of their status, but because they are human." Samantha swallowed hard, her voice failing her. She wanted to apologize again, but no words felt sufficient. "You have an opportunity here," Iris said, her voice softening slightly, "to learn, to grow, and to do better. I hope you take it." Without waiting for a response, Iris turned towards the door, leaving Samantha rooted in place, a storm of emotions swirling within her. The next day, Mr. Harris called a meeting for the entire staff. The room was filled with mixed emotions, curiosity, guilt, and a collective hope for change. "We're better than this," Mr. Harris began, his voice resolute. "What happened last night was unacceptable. And it's a reminder that we all need to reflect on how we treat others. Our guests, our coworkers, everyone. From this point forward, we'll be implementing mandatory inclusivity and respect training for the entire team." The staff nodded in agreement, the weight of the situation settling in. Even Samantha, sitting quietly in the corner, felt a flicker of gratitude. Later that evening, a surprise announcement caught everyone off guard. Mrs. Williams had left a message for Mr. Harris. She would be making a significant donation to fund the new training program. "I'm not one to hold grudges," she had written. "Grace is a gift we give not just to others, but to ourselves. Let's use this moment to grow." The staff was moved by her generosity, and the lesson began to resonate deeply. What do you think about Iris's choice to forgive and help the staff grow? Could you have been as gracious in her position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring tales. Time passed, and Samantha slowly began to change. She reflected deeply on Iris's words, replaying them in her mind as she worked. She started greeting every guest warmly, checking the reservation system carefully, and going out of her way to make everyone feel welcome. A brief montage shows Samantha offering kind smiles, guiding elderly guests to their tables with care, and assisting coworkers with genuine warmth. Her transformation wasn't instantaneous, but it was evident. Iris's influence reached further than Samantha. The restaurant adopted a culture of inclusivity and respect, setting a new standard for how they treated their guests and staff. Patrons began to notice the change, and La Belle Maison flourished even more than before. One evening, months later, Iris dined with Mr. Blake at her usual table. The restaurant was bustling, the atmosphere lively yet elegant. From across the room, Samantha spotted her and hesitated for a moment. Then, with a deep breath, she approached their table, her expression earnest. "Good evening, Mrs. Williams," Samantha said softly. "It's wonderful to see you again." Iris looked up, her eyes meeting Samantha's with a small, knowing smile. "Good evening, Samantha," she replied. As Samantha walked away, Iris turned to Mr. Blake, her voice calm yet resolute. "True power lies in kindness," she said quietly. "Never underestimate the quiet strength of grace." And to my dearest viewers, sometimes true power truly does lie in kindness, dignity, and grace. Subscribe now. What lesson did you take away from this story? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. See you in the next story.